I found out my parents stole my $377,000 inheritance and then ghosted me like I never even existed. Hi, I'm Sam. I came home from college one spring break only to find our house empty, my belongings stuffed into trash bags, and no explanation waiting for me. Years later, when the truth finally surfaced, they called me 296 times, but not once to say they were sorry. Have you ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let's talk about what family really means. Coming home for spring break was supposed to feel like a warm hug. Instead, it felt like a goodbye I never saw coming. The drive from Eugene to Medford usually took a little over 4 hours, but this time it felt endless. The rolling hills blurred past, painted with patches of late snow that hadn't yet surrendered to spring. I kept picturing the porch swing at our house creaking in the breeze, the way it had when Ethan and I used to spend lazy summer evenings there, legs swinging as we plotted our endless futures. The memory was almost enough to soothe the growing knot in my stomach. I turned down our old street, noticing how the maples still stood like sentries, their bare branches scratching faint lines against the sky. The houses looked familiar, bikes left in driveways, wind chimes singing faintly, but as I pulled up to our place, a coldness spread through me. The curtains were gone. No car in the driveway. No lights in the windows. Instead, a bold "For Sale" sign stabbed the front lawn, its edges flapping slightly in the breeze like a flag of surrender. For a second, I thought maybe I had the wrong address. I even checked the cracked street lamp at the corner, the same one I'd tripped over in 8th grade. It was still there, leaning slightly as if bowing under the weight of memory. Everything was where it should have been. Everything. Except us. I parked at the curb and got out slowly, my breath misting in the crisp air. My boots crunched against dry leaves scattered across the walk. The porch swing creaked, pushed gently by the wind, an empty seat moving back and forth as if mourning someone who never came back. There, on the steps, sat 3 large black trash bags. They slumped together, sad and shapeless. My hands trembled as I climbed the porch steps. One of the bags was knotted tight, but with a few shakes, the plastic loosened. Inside, I saw my red sweater, the one Mom had given me last Christmas, crumpled and slightly damp. Beneath it, my old high school textbooks, edges worn and stained. At the bottom, a cracked photo frame, my graduation picture, me standing awkwardly between Mom and Dad, the 3 of us smiling stiffly at the camera. I staggered back, the world tilting. My phone slipped from my pocket, clattering onto the wooden porch. Hands fumbling, I snatched it up and dialed Mom first. No answer. I tried Dad. After 3 rings, he picked up. "Dad, I'm standing in front of the house. Where is everything? What's going on?" His voice came through flat and thin. "We moved." "What? Without telling me?" My voice cracked against the cold. "You're an adult now. Handle it." Click. The line went dead. I stared at the screen, willing it to light up again to offer some explanation, any shred of humanity. When it stayed black, I called back. Busy signal, then straight to voicemail. I tried Ethan. No answer. Tried again. And again. Each unanswered call chipped away at me, like slow, deliberate chisels against stone. The neighborhood around me blurred, houses folding into the background noise of a life I apparently no longer belonged to. A gust of wind rushed through the yard, rattling the porch swing against the railing, that hollow thump echoing louder than any words my family had left unspoken. I bent down and tied the trash bags shut again, gathering them like a mourner collecting remnants after a funeral. Each bag was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just more tired than I knew. I stuffed them into the trunk of my battered car, squeezing them in between old textbooks and a suitcase that still smelled faintly of campus laundry detergent. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the empty driveway, the "For Sale" sign, the darkened windows. No neighbors waved, no curious faces peered out. It was as if the house had already forgotten we ever lived there, scrubbed us clean from its memory. I turned the key in the ignition, but didn't drive away yet. I thought about the birthday parties held in the backyard, about the nights Mom would make chili, and we'd sit in front of the TV, arguing over who got the last piece of cornbread. I thought about Ethan and me, trying to build a treehouse that never quite made it past the planning stage. It had been imperfect, messy, sometimes lonely, but it had been mine. Until now. The cracked graduation frame lay in the passenger seat, face down. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The wind picked up again, scattering more dry leaves across the yard. The porch swing moaned as it rocked in the growing twilight. If love lived here once, it packed up and left without me. And just like that, I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the house, the porch, and whatever was left of the past behind me. Rock bottom didn't announce itself. It just left me standing at a motel check-in with a $50 bill and nowhere else to be. The neon sign buzzed faintly above me, spelling out Sunset Inn in half-lit letters. A few of the bulbs had burned out, making the whole thing look even sadder than it sounded. The air smelled like rain that hadn't quite arrived, thick with the promise of another cold night. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself and stepped inside. The motel lobby was small, with cracked vinyl chairs and a faded carpet that once had a pattern, though now it looked more like a stubborn memory. Behind the counter, a bored young woman flipped through a magazine. She barely looked up when I placed my $50 bill on the counter. "One night?" I said, my voice hoarse from the hours of silent driving. "Room 12. She muttered, sliding a key across to me without ceremony. Her fingernails were chipped blue. She didn't ask for ID. Maybe she could tell by the look on my face that I wasn't someone worth the trouble. The room wasn't much better. The door stuck when I tried to open it, and when it finally gave, the hinges groaned like a protest. Inside, the bed sagged in the middle, covered with a mustard yellow bedspread that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. The heater rattled when I turned it on, then gave up with a cough. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the springs creak beneath me. Outside, the highway hummed with the steady drone of cars passing in the night, each one carrying someone who wasn't me, someone who had a destination, a home, a plan. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, because I was too tired to. Dad's old words echoed in my head, bitter and hollow. "You're the strong one, Sam." I stared at the faded ceiling, willing myself to move, to think, to figure out what came next. But the only thing I could manage was to dig through my backpack and pull out my battered laptop. The motel's Wi-Fi was barely functional, but eventually my inbox loaded. Most messages were junk, newsletters I never read, reminders about library books back on campus. And then, buried among them, an old email from Professor Judith Meyer. "If you ever need a place during the break, don't hesitate. Our guest room's always open." I had dismissed it when she first sent it, thinking it was just one of those polite things professors said without meaning it. But now, sitting in this crumbling motel, polite or not, it felt like a lifeline. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Pride fought with desperation, each one digging in its heels. I hated the idea of showing weakness, of admitting I had no backup plan. But something deeper, something more stubborn, pushed me to type 4 simple words. "Can I come stay?" I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I closed the laptop, pressed my back against the cold wall and listened to the night sounds, the soft groan of the bed springs, the whistle of wind against the window. Minutes passed, or maybe an hour. Time stretched and folded into itself. Then my phone buzzed. Of course, porch lights on, no questions, no hesitation. The knot in my chest loosened just a little. I grabbed my things, shoving what I could into my backpack, leaving the rest. The $50 room could keep the memories I didn't want to carry. Outside, the air had turned colder. Clouds heavy with unshed rain hung low over the highway. I climbed into my car and turned the engine over, the dashboard lights flickering weakly to life. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and uncertain. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I had a destination again. I drove through the night, headlights cutting narrow paths through the mist. The miles slipped by in a blur. I clutched the steering wheel tighter with every passing sign, every empty stretch of road. At some point, the first drops of rain began tapping against the windshield, slow at first, then faster, as if urging me forward. When I finally turned down Professor Myers Street, the houses huddled quietly under the shroud of misty rain. And there it was, her porch light, burning a soft, steady gold against the gray. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment, letting the warmth of that small light seep into me. It wasn't just a bulb screwed into a socket. It was a message. You're not invisible. You're not forgotten. You still matter. I stepped out of the car, the damp air wrapping around me like a second skin. Before I could even reach the steps, the front door opened. Professor Myers stood there, wearing a faded sweater and holding a mug in one hand. Her eyes, sharp and kind, met mine without pity or judgment. "Come in, Sam," she said simply, stepping aside. Inside, her home smelled of cinnamon and apples, a comforting blend that tugged something loose in my chest. She handed me the mug, hot apple cider, not tea, and didn't ask why my eyes were red or why my clothes were still damp from the rain. Instead, she pointed to the kitchen table where a slice of apple pie waited, steam curling from its crust. "You look like you could use something sweet," she said, her voice gentle. I sank into the chair, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. For the first time in days, I let my shoulders fall. I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to defend. I could just be. The pie was warm and slightly tart, the crust flaking perfectly under my fork. I ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was the first real food I'd had in years. Across the table, Professor Myers sipped her own cider, not pushing, not prying, just offering quiet company. Sometimes kindness doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers just loud enough to hear over the noise of your own despair. Later, she showed me to a small guest room upstairs, tucked neatly under the eaves. The bedspread was worn but clean, the window cracked open just enough to let in the cool, damp air. As I slipped under the covers, exhaustion washing over me like a tide, I caught one last glimpse of the porch light outside, still burning steady against the darkness. For the first time in days, a porch light was waiting for me, and this time, it stayed lit. Some ghosts don't slam doors. They just erase you so quietly you wonder if you ever existed to them at all. Summer had settled over Eugene with the kind of slow, golden light that made everything feel softer, even the pain. The trees lining the streets drooped with heavy green leaves, and the sidewalks baked under the afternoon sun. It was the kind of season where life seemed to stretch out lazily ahead, asking nothing more than for you to keep moving. I spent most of my days quietly working part-time at the campus library, shelving dusty books no one had touched in years. In the evenings, I stayed at Professor Myers' house, slowly gathering the pieces of my life that hadn't been left behind on a crumbling front porch. One afternoon, sorting through the last of my boxes, I found a stack of unopened mail crammed into the bottom of an old duffel bag. The envelopes were stiff with neglect, corners bent, ink beginning to fade. Bank notices, letters from unfamiliar law firms, things I had never seen before, things that must have been redirected to the old house and then dumped without a second glance. I sat cross-legged on the bed, sifting through them, my fingers trembling slightly. One letter caught my eye, a notice from my bank dated a few weeks after my 18th birthday. It was brief, almost indifferent. Final notification. Your account has been closed per authorized guardian request. I read it 3 times before it sank in. My parents had drained my savings, every babysitting paycheck, every summer job deposit, every Christmas tip from neighbors, all of it wiped clean like it never mattered, like I never mattered. The room spun a little, the warm sunlight suddenly feeling too sharp, too intrusive. I pressed the letter flat against my knee, breathing through the wave of nausea rising in my throat. Across the room, my worn leather journal sat half buried under a pile of books. I reached for it almost without thinking, flipping open to a blank page. At the top, in shaky handwriting, I wrote 2 words: New Beginnings. It wasn't a plan, not yet, just a promise to myself. Downstairs, the faint clatter of dishes and the soft hum of conversation filtered up from the kitchen. Professor Meyer was hosting a few colleagues for an informal dinner. Normally, I would have hidden away, avoiding the small talk, the careful questions. But today, something stubborn in me refused to stay invisible. I tucked the journal under my arm and made my way down. The kitchen smelled like roasted vegetables and fresh bread, a warm, forgiving kind of aroma that filled the gaps words often failed to reach. Professor Meyer stood by the sink, laughing quietly with a woman I hadn't met before. She noticed me hovering in the doorway and smiled, that gentle kind of smile that never demanded anything in return. "Sam, come join us," she said, handing me a glass of iced tea. The woman next to her turned, offering a handshake. "Carla Summers," she said. "I work with the Fair Living Coalition downtown." Her grip was firm, her eyes sharp, as if she could see every crack I was trying to paper over. Not unkind, just aware. We made small talk over dinner, the easy kind that didn't ask too much but still left room to breathe. Carla told stories about her work, fighting unfair evictions, helping tenants navigate labyrinthine lease agreements, standing up to landlords who thought college kids didn't know their rights. I listened, something stirring quietly in my chest, a flicker of recognition, a flicker of want. After dessert, a simple peach cobbler that tasted like summer itself, Carla pulled a folded flyer from her bag. "We're looking for summer interns," she said casually, sliding it across the table toward me. "It's not glamorous work. Sometimes it's answering phones, sorting paperwork, but it matters." I hesitated, tracing the edge of the flyer with my fingertip. "What made you get into it?" I asked, surprising myself. Carla's smile softened. "Someone once helped me when no one else would. I figured the least I could do was pass it on. Simple. Honest." I looked at Professor Meyer, who just nodded slightly, as if to say, "The choice is yours. No pushing, no guilt, just a door left open." Later that night, curled up in the attic room under the slanted ceiling, I stared at the flyer. The words blurred a little under the dim lamplight, but the feeling they stirred stayed sharp. For months, all I had done was survive. Maybe it was time to try something else. I filled out the online application before I could talk myself out of it. The questions were straightforward: name, major, interests. At the end, there was a blank space labeled, "Why do you want to intern with us?" I thought about the empty chairs at my scholarship ceremony, the ones that should have been filled with the people who were supposed to love me. I thought about the savings account I had worked so hard to build, gone without a word. I thought about the way kindness had come, not from blood, but from people who had no obligation to me at all. I typed, "Because everyone deserves to know they're worth fighting for." I hit submit before fear could steal the courage from my fingertips. As I closed the laptop, a breeze slipped in through the cracked window, stirring the pages of my journal where new beginnings still shone in fresh ink. Maybe the family I lost wasn't the worst thing. Maybe it was the permission to build something better. Turns out, betrayal doesn't knock. It slips a letter under your door. It was a late February morning, the kind where the world still smelled like yesterday's rain and the sidewalks glistened under a reluctant sun. I had just finished my second cup of coffee and was sorting through the usual stack of junk mail when I noticed an envelope tucked between a pizza coupon and an alumni newsletter. The return address caught my eye immediately: Cruz and Moreno, Legal Associates, Santa Fe, New Mexico. I frowned. I didn't know anyone in New Mexico. Carefully, I slit the envelope open and pulled out a single-page letter printed on thick, official-looking paper. It only took a few lines for my hands to start shaking. "Dear Ms. Samantha Dawson, we are contacting you regarding the recent probate settlement of the estate of Maria Delgado, sole legal beneficiary. Parcel of land sold to the city of Santa Fe for development. Current value, $377,000. The words swam in front of me. Maria Delgado, my grandmother. I hadn't seen her since I was a kid, but I remembered her clearly. Strong hands kneading dough for tamales, the soft murmur of Spanish lullabies, the way her hugs could fold you into a world that smelled like cinnamon and hope. She had lived simply, scraping by on a tiny piece of desert land everyone else had forgotten, or so I thought. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the letter crinkling in my grip. My chest tightened as pieces started clicking together, slow and sickening. I remembered asking Dad once, around my 18th birthday, what would happen to Grandma's house someday. He had waved me off with a grunt. Don't worry about adult stuff, Sam. Adult stuff. Like selling off my inheritance behind my back. The realization hit like a punch to the ribs. They had known. They had sold it. They had taken the money, without telling me, without offering a single explanation, without so much as a goodbye. I pressed my forehead to the cool surface of the kitchen table, trying to breathe through the swell of nausea. A soft knock on the door pulled me back to the present. Wiping my face quickly, I opened it to find Helen, our old neighbor from Medford, standing there with a plastic bag in one hand and a nervous smile. "Sorry to just drop by," she said, shifting from foot to foot. "Got some mail forwarded from the old address. Thought it looked important." I thanked her, trying to keep my voice steady, and she handed over another envelope, this one forwarded twice, battered and thin. "I hope you're doing okay, sweetie," she said quietly before retreating down the porch steps. I closed the door and leaned against it for a long moment. Then, with fingers that felt strangely detached from the rest of me, I opened the second envelope. Inside was a printout of the initial notification sent almost a year earlier, sent to my parents' address, ignored, hidden. I didn't need more proof, but there it was anyway. That night, I sat in the small living room of Professor Meyer's house, the unopened envelope spread out on the coffee table between us. She didn't say anything at first, just poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea and settled into the armchair across from me. When I finally found the words, they came out jagged and raw. "They knew," I said. "They sold the land. They took the money. They left me with 3 trash bags and a voicemail." Professor Meyer stirred her tea slowly, watching me with those calm, unwavering eyes. "I'm sorry, Sam," she said simply. "I wish I could say it surprises me." I laughed, the sound brittle in my throat. I keep thinking if I could just talk to them, maybe there's some explanation, some mistake. But I let the words trail off. She didn't fill the silence. She let it stretch between us, not as a burden, but as an acknowledgement. After a while, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You don't owe them a confrontation," she said, "or an explanation. You only owe yourself peace." I nodded slowly, the truth of it settling heavy but sure in my bones. Later, upstairs in the attic room that had become more of a home than any place I had ever lived before, I sat at my little desk. The cracked graduation photo from that day on the porch still rested in the corner, face down, where I had left it months ago. I picked it up now, running my thumb over the fractured glass. 3 smiling faces trapped in a frame that told a lie. Without thinking too much, I set the photo back down, face down again, this time with finality. They didn't lose me. They sold me, pocketed the profit, pretended I never existed. And now, finally, I was done pretending too. The rain started up again outside, tapping softly against the window pane, as if the world was offering a quiet kind of sympathy. I pulled my journal from the nightstand and opened to a fresh page. Beneath the words, "New Beginnings," I added another line. New rules. No more chasing people who choose to leave. No more mourning places that never felt like home. No more believing that blood equals loyalty. I closed the journal with a decisive snap and slid it back into the drawer. Tonight, the past could howl all it wanted outside my window. It would not be getting back in. If you have to call 296 times to prove you care, maybe you never did. It started quietly, like most storms do. One missed call while I was in a meeting with Carla, then two. By lunchtime, my phone lit up with a relentless buzz, each vibration a tiny hammer against my chest. By the end of the day, the counter read 43 missed calls. And that was only the beginning. The cherry trees along the sidewalks of Eugene were just starting to bloom, soft pink clouds against the blue-gray sky. Spring was creeping in, gentle and stubborn, pushing winter's weight away. I could smell it in the air, wet earth, young grass, fresh starts. I should have felt nothing but hope. Instead, every time my phone buzzed, it dragged me back to a place I thought I had already buried. By the second week of March, the calls had tripled. Voicemails filled my inbox. Texts piled up, pleading, guilt-tripping, accusing. You owe us a conversation. You're still our daughter. We did what we thought was best. Some messages were short bursts of anger. Some read like awkward scripts, stitched together from apologies they didn't really mean. One night, I sat on the porch steps of Professor Meyer's house, staring at the screen as another flood of missed calls rolled in. I didn't answer. I didn't block them either. I needed to see it for what it was. Carla sat down next to me, a mug of tea cupped between her hands. "You know what this is, right?" she said quietly, without judgment. I nodded, my voice rough. "They want access, not accountability." Carla smiled a little, sad and proud all at once. Exactly. The thing about growth is that it doesn't come with a parade. No brass bands, no fireworks, just small, stubborn choices, one after another, until one day you realize you've walked farther than you ever thought you could. By early April, Haven Link was beginning to take root. Our little office, once just a borrowed corner of the community center, had turned into a real space. Students stopped by daily asking for help with rental contracts, unsafe housing, sudden eviction notices. We weren't saving the world, but we were making a dent, and every dent mattered. That's when the invitation came. A local social justice forum wanted me to present Haven Link's story, how it started, what we aimed to build, why it mattered. The email was short, professional, almost bland, but the meaning behind it cracked something open inside me. Someone had seen us, had seen me, not as a cautionary tale, not as a daughter who needed fixing, but as someone who was building something that mattered. The day of the forum dawned clear and brisk. Sunlight filtered through the new leaves, and the sidewalks gleamed where the morning dew still clung. I pulled on my simple navy suit, the one I'd bought secondhand and tailored myself. The fabric was smooth under my palms, solid and unpretentious. No frills, no apologies. Carla met me outside the venue, a restored old theater downtown. She squeezed my shoulder once firmly. "You're ready," she said simply. Inside, the rows of seats were already filling up. Community leaders, students, activists, a few curious townspeople looking for free coffee and a cause. I took my place backstage, palms dry, heart steady. When my name was called, I walked out under the bright stage lights, the glare momentarily blinding. I adjusted the mic, took a breath, and scanned the room. That's when I saw them. Third row from the back, Mom, Dad, Ethan, sitting stiffly, close together but looking everywhere except at each other. Their faces were pale, tense, expectant. The weight of their presence hit me like a gust of cold air. Old instincts roared up, panic, guilt, the desperate longing to be good enough, to fix everything. But I stayed rooted. They were just people now, people who had made choices, people who had to live with them. I cleared my throat and began. I spoke about how Haven Link had started with a simple idea, that no one should have to navigate housing insecurity alone. I shared stories of students who had fought unfair leases and won, stories of tenants who found their voice when the system tried to silence them. I didn't mention my family. I didn't mention the trash bags, the stolen money, the 3 years of silence. But it was there, between every line. The audience listened, leaning forward, nodding in quiet agreement. When I finished, polite applause rippled through the room. I stepped back from the podium and caught one last glimpse of them. Their faces were filled with something that looked like regret, or maybe just fear. Their hands were still folded in their laps, still clenching invisible knives. Their faces asked for forgiveness, but their hands still held the knife. I turned away, walking off the stage into the soft clatter of conversation, the low hum of ordinary life continuing on. Outside, the cherry trees rained soft pink petals onto the sidewalks. I tilted my face up to the sky and breathed deep. It smelled like rain and promise. Not every goodbye needs closure. Some just need a closed door and the strength to keep walking. It was a crisp morning in early 2024 when I stood outside the new Haven Link office, coffee warming my hands, and watched the volunteers finish painting the last stretch of our mural. Bright colors swept across the side of the building. Open hands, leafy vines, a tiny house tucked safely among the trees. It wasn't a masterpiece by any critic's standard, but to me, it was beautiful. Every brushstroke was a promise that no one would be left alone without knowing where to turn. Inside, the walls were clean and welcoming, sunlight spilling through wide windows. Students wandered in and out, some clutching lease agreements, some just needing a place to breathe. Carla leaned against the front desk, chatting with a new volunteer, her laughter easy, light. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another string of missed calls and messages from the old numbers I hadn't blocked. I pulled it out, looked at the screen for a long moment, and then, without anger or hesitation, slid it back into my bag. It didn't hurt anymore. It didn't even sting. Professor Meyer's voice came back to me, soft but firm. Home isn't something you lose, it's something you build. I smiled to myself, feeling the truth of it settle warmly into my bones. That afternoon, I stood at a small podium in the university's event hall, delivering a keynote speech at the Community Impact Awards. Rows of folding chairs stretched out in front of me, filled with students, professors, community leaders, the very people who had helped stitch the fabric of Haven Link together. I spoke plainly, the way Professor Meyer once taught me. I used to believe that home was something given, I said, voice steady. A place, a family, a history you simply belong to. But sometimes, when you can't find home, you build one, for others and for yourself. Heads nodded across the room, some smiles, a few misty eyes. Afterward, as the crowd filtered out into the chilly afternoon, a young woman approached me near the exit. She was no older than 19, backpack slung awkwardly over one shoulder, a worn look in her eyes that I knew too well. She hesitated, then blurted, "Thank you." I thought it was just me. Her voice cracked a little on the last word. Without thinking, I reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "It's not just you," I said. "It never was." She smiled through the tears, and I let her go, watching as she disappeared into the crowd, lighter somehow, even if only for a little while. Later that evening, back at the Haven Link office, I packed up a few odds and ends left over from our old space. Among them, tucked at the bottom of a battered box, was the cracked graduation photo frame I had carried for years. I held it in my hands for a long moment. There we were, Mom, Dad, Ethan, and me, all frozen in a smile that had meant less than I wanted it to. The glass was still cracked across the corner, a fracture I had never gotten around to fixing, and I realized I didn't need to anymore. With a steady breath, I set the frame gently into a donation box, not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but because it no longer belonged in the life I was building. They had taken my inheritance. I had built something priceless. As I locked the office door behind me and stepped out into the crisp night air, the mural glowed softly under the streetlights, hands reaching out, vines climbing higher, a home cradled in the trees, and I walked forward without looking back. That night, as I walked out of the Haven Link office, I understood that what I had lost could not define what I was building. Life sometimes doesn't give us perfect families, but it always gives us the opportunity to become a safe place for others. If we know how to make room in our hearts for kindness, old wounds will become the stones that build a new home. This journey reminded me that true love does not need to be tied to old memories, but grows from every small action we do for each other today. If this story touches you, I would love to hear your thoughts about family, about the homes we build with our own hands, and about the quiet power of perseverance.